Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Hey everybody, welcome along. Ready to smoke myself up a drink. Oh, a little bit of a mess. All right. Hey Mona. Hey Carol, hey Mom and Marie and Jim. Let's smoke me up in Manhattan here, shall we? Hey Martin, Heather, Carol, Octavio.
In the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
There. Smoke Manhattan coming up. Nice for the fall season. Hey Jerry. And look who's here already. Fulfilling his contractual obligation. Cue your jokes, it's okay. Howdy, Alf. Hey, Gene. That is a cocktail smoker. Smoke a little bit of cherry wood into my Manhattan tonight. Ah. There's really nothing you can do to make a drink cooler than setting fire to it. Hey, Lori. Hey, Heather. Hey, Susan. Hey, Jim, glad to have you here. I like the cemetery a lot, too. We're going to do a virtual from now on. For quite some time. I'm blurry again. I did try changing the resolution a little bit on here, trying to make it easier on me. Hey, Carly. Hey, Wendy. I've had it set at a different resolution before. Caused some problems. Ooh, Luann, bad to hear that. Hey, Evelyn. I'll keep experimenting. Paul, I am nowhere near ready for Halloween. Are you kidding me? Okay, I don't look blurry to some people. All right. I had set the resolution a little bit higher up for the Dylan Fans for Harris live stream. But then it made all of my stuff smaller. I had to redo every single frame in everything. So I've tried setting it back, but I couldn't find the exact setting again. Hey, Donna. This is the gravestone over there. This is Dr. Hip. That's what they call me. Morning somewhere. Aiden and I still talk about the time I told him, we can find out who won the game by calling Australia because it's already tomorrow there. And he said, no, you can't. You don't have the number. So pulled out the phone and called a McDonald's in Sydney just to prove to him that I could. We should have t-shirts for those of us who were on the last Oak Woods tour. Also, I got an idea here.
Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
Needing everybody all around. For all I'll ever more careful with all my heart. All right, got one set up for a minute here. Hey, Kathleen, Jill, Kathleen, Leah, the Euphonium section, all of you copper belt euphoniums. No, not frozen. I was just looking something up. Hey, Steve. Whole lot of shaking going on. Evening, Susan. All you Mysterians out there everywhere. Only a couple of weeks until Mystericon. My heart. Hey, Megan. Quite a few of you that I saw last week over at the Willie Nelson Bob Dylan concert. Special shout out to Willie's rendition of Last Leaf by Tom Waits. Tell the stars above you. There was something about Ronnie's book up there. So far, so good. All right, thanks, Karen. Susan, yes, people keep asking me. Yes, we are definitely doing Find a Grave Friday at Mystericon. It won't be at exactly the same cemetery, I don't think, but it'll be right by it. And I'll let you know ahead. Bob, sorry to hear that. Diane, good to hear that. Well, thanks a lot. Might have to go to LA for a day. In between here in Mystericon. Julie, yes, on YouTube under Adam Salzer. Hey, Tom. Hey, Joyce. Hey, Katie. Hey, Gina. Ooh. Yeah, Gina, that's a pretty good excuse. We'll be glad to have you in Chicago. Hey, Grandma Belle. Well, let's switch the music over a little bit here. Let's switch off Benny a little bit early and jump over to something a little relevant. Here's a little graveyard ditty. I know this from a rockapella rendition. They're best known for...
Took place in a New York cemetery. Was a Jumbi Jamboree. Took place in Woodlawn Cemetery. Jumbies from all parts of the island.
Hey, I've been to that cemetery.
Some of them are great Calypsonian. Since the season
our first mayor is in Woodlawn.
They got together in Bacchanal and they singing.
Back to back, belly to belly, I don't give a damn, I'm stone dead already. Back to back, belly to belly, it's a zombie jamboree. Gotta show you guys the face Miles is making at me here. Belly to belly, I don't give a damn, I'm stone dead already. That is the correct response. Yeah, I know it from rockapella, but this is the Charmer, alias Louis Farrakhan. When he was a young calypso singer. Before he was freaking my tours out. You know, I'd move my tour for anybody, but the fact that they were being so deferential to him there really got under my skin. Miles not so into the calypso beat. Back to back, belly to belly, I don't give a damn, I'm stone dead already. Back to back, belly to belly at the zombie jamboree. Honestly, I'm still burned out on zombie stuff 15 years after my zombie book came out. I wonder if that one's back in, if they reverted the rights. I couldn't find anybody to email at Random House about the rights to my old books. I think every 6 months, everybody in publishing is summarily drug out into the street and shot and replaced by a new crop. Liquid IV and vodka. Just hook it to my veins. Hey, Susan. Hey, Heidi. Hey, everybody. Everybody, back to back, belly to belly, I don't give a damn, I'm stone dead already. Back to back, belly to belly, it's a zombie jamboree. Back to back, belly to belly, I don't give a damn, I'm stone dead already. Back to back, belly to belly, it's a zombie jamboree. The Dead Ringers should do this song. Woodlawn Cemetery, too. We have actually been there. There were turkeys running around in the place. We went to do a Find a Grave Friday there. We found Miles Davis, who I've been listening to obsessively this week. All of these late 60s albums that he did with Wayne Shorter and his second Great Quintet. Put a little bit more Benny back on just so it's moving, but it is time to start going in a second here. See what in the world is going on with the Dylan Discord. Okay, apparently tonight in the Dylan Show in Ohio, John Mellencamp covered, in his opening set, covered All Along the Watchtower. Then Dylan came out and opened with it. First time he's played it since 2018. All right, that's the kind of nerdy things that we get really nerdy about, honestly. But all right, it is time that we get started here. So welcome along, everybody, getting all of the buttons pushed in the right order. So I have notes, I have the screen, I have the chat. We've got everything. That means it is time that we get started. Time. See what's become of me as I looked around at all my possibilities. All right, welcome along, everybody. Yes, Miles, Priya, and Lily are all safe and sound, despite the fact that we're living in a neighborhood absolutely full of immigrants. I'd much rather have them as neighbors than Trump supporters. Welcome along. We are here at a virtual tour of Oakwood Cemetery tonight. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours, author of such books as Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. I know it's going to be a great meeting with the TV producer when they call me up to talk Holmes, and the first thing they say is, I just want to tell you how much I loved Devil in the White City, which is pretty much every conversation I ever had. Except, strangely, Russia Times. Also, Ghosts of Chicago, the book, now in a 10th anniversary edition that you can get on Amazon. Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. And various books such as How to Get Suspended and Influence People. I have no idea what that one was doing in this deck, but here we are. So, we do mostly walking tours. We do virtual tours all the time. We did a couple of virtual tours here at Oakwood Cemetery back in the day when we were first doing virtual tours, most recently about 2 years ago now. Since then, I thought I would retire this one because I could do it as a walking tour at least every now and then. Many of you already know the story. We did a walking tour here. They're pretty bad about communication. They don't really email you back to confirm that it's going to be okay. When we got there, they made us move all of our cars to a back parking lot. Then I came back and they said, no, you have to move them even further than that, because there was a guy coming with Secret Service protection who didn't want to see any cars. It turned out that this person coming was Louis Farrakhan, who was coming to a funeral there. He does not have Secret Service protection. It's like, this guy just recently called Jews termites. He thinks termites can drive their cars to 2 different locations. Then we had to reroute the tour for the guy. And I will never bother somebody at a funeral. Cemeteries are Rick's Cafe. They are neutral ground. It would have been rather tempting to ask him to sing Zombie Jamboree while we were right there in the cemetery, but I would have been polite enough not to do that. But getting my tour rerouted and acting like Farrakhan has Secret Service protection, probably the most successful spreader of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of his generation, rubbed me the wrong way. We will not be back at Oakwoods for quite some time. But it is a fantastic cemetery. It is full of fantastic stories, and we can still tell them right here in virtual space. We're going to start with this interesting fire. Actually, let's back up a little. Let's first make our way on through here. Here we have, this is kind of similar to what they've got in Lincoln Park. This is a relic from the Great Chicago Fire. Now, one guy who is now at Rose Hill, the grandfather of Gloria Swanson, built an entire place out of these things. You can see there's also this one over in Lincoln Park. They have now moved this to a prominent location. It looks like a giant fossilized dino turd. But at the time, it was just kind of half buried when I last filmed it. But this is a relic of the Great Chicago Fire. It's interesting that this would be built by a guy who was Gloria Swanson's great-great-grandfather, because it is right here on Sunset Boulevard, here at Oakwood Cemetery. Now, around here, they've got a lot of different signs up about, like, no loud noises, no loud music, no ball playing. You know, things that I would imagine are fairly obvious, but also no barbecuing, which is an interesting one because they, in fact, have a barbecue pit set up right here, which I think is fantastic. I think that all cemeteries ought to have a barbecue pit like this. I think cemeteries are places for the living. I think it's a place that we can go and have a picnic. That's not necessarily the common opinion, but it was the way that cemeteries used to function, and I'd love to see that come back, and I think there's been a movement lately to start bringing it back. And having a barbecue pit here is probably a good start. Now, there's a lot of interesting urban legends about Oakwoods. It tended to generate more of them than other cemeteries. There were a lot of stories early on that they would see people after a funeral would come and drop broken bits of pottery through the gates, or they would light a candle, snuff it out on the other side of the gates, and drop it. Nobody really could explain to them why. They would just say it was old-fashioned. And in this case, they feared a ghost, ran away from what turned out to be a hold-up man. You end up with a lot of odd stories in this kind of place. But just wandering around among those who show up just for a quick walk around the pond, quite a number of the tombstones here would have been carved by Elmo Tombstone Williams and his family. Called such because he ran Elmo's Tombstone Shop, and before you go, see Elmo, it said. They were still doing things by hand. A lot of stuff is just done by lasers nowadays, but they would say that this will last longer than the laser cut ones. I don't think laser cut ones have been around long enough to know exactly how accurate that is going to turn out to be. Certainly there are any number of hand-cut stones that are not that well read anymore, but if they had been cut by lasers, it wouldn't make that much of a difference in those cases. But alright, those of you just joining us, here we are. And we'll move on back. We gotta be careful with the barbecue pet jokes. I love a good Alf joke myself, but too many people are taking that crap seriously. And speaking of getting rid of a skunk, right here we have perhaps Chicago's most notoriously corrupt mayor. But really, it is the son, William Hale Thompson, is the son of Colonel William Hale Thompson, who of all people in Chicago may have had the most fantastic facial hair of them all. But he was the father of William Hale, alias Big Bill Thompson, who was he was mayor for a time in the 1910s, then came back for another stint in the 1920s. Widely regarded as one of our more corrupt mayors. He may not have even been one of the most corrupt. He was just one of the more buffoonish. Like, he would say that he was having a debate, then he would show up and he would just have rats in cages with the names of his opponents. You could definitely imagine him saying there will be no third debate. He tried to run primarily on racism, mainly racism against the English, which not everybody would consider racism exactly, but if we want to get bogged down in semantics. But he went on a crusade to ban pro-English history books from libraries and promised that if elected, if given the chance, he would punch the King of England in the snoot. I'd kind of like to see somebody do that, just kind of on general principle, honestly, without any regard to who the King of England is at the time. He thought that this would ingratiate him with the Irish vote, but meanwhile was ripping on Anton Cermak, his opponent, saying, what kind of a name is that, Cermak, for a World's Fair mayor? World's Fair was coming back in 1933, but he was ejected by the electorate in the early 1930s, and I always feel like reading a little bit of the Chicago Tribune's farewell. Now, he was a member of a party that they normally promoted at the Chicago Tribune, but Thompson recognized the Tribune as his chief enemy. The Tribune was glad to earn that opinion. It certainly tried to do so. It has taken the fight to him on every occasion during the long and depraved course of his administration. It is unpleasant business to eject a skunk, but someone has to do it. For Chicago, Thompson has meant filth, corruption, obscenity, idiocy, and bankruptcy. He has given the city an international reputation for moronic buffoonery, barbaric crime, triumphant hoodlumism, unchecked graft, and a dejected citizenship. He nearly ruined the property and completely destroyed the pride of the city. He made Chicago a byword for the collapse of American civilization. In his attempt to continue this, he excelled himself as a liar and defamer of character. He's out. He's not only out, but he is dishonored. He is deserted by his friends. He is permanently marked by the evidence of his character and conduct. His health is impaired by his ways of life, and he leaves office and goes from the city the most discredited man who ever held place in it. We're just going to pause here so everybody can have a cigarette after that. I'm sure very few of us smoke anymore. I never did. But, move over. He's out right near another mayor. This is actually a new picture over here. But right down the block from him, there's a number of mayors here. All the big cemeteries have a number of mayors. I don't always feature them on tours because, hey, it's mayors. We've had a couple who are real skunks, in fact. There's a couple that I think were even worse than Big Bill Thompson. Buckner Stith Morris. But this is Harold Washington, the first black mayor of Chicago, who proudly said that in the old days when you said you were from Chicago, people said, Al Capone, bang, bang, bang. And now they ask, how's Harold? But he died while he was in office, shortly after being elected to his second term back in the 1980s. But just recently, on that ill-fated tour, one of the vehicles that had to be moved was the hearse that carried Big Bill Thompson, that carried Harold Washington into Oakwood Cemetery to begin with. The guy happened to own that hearse when he came in, and it established that this was originally the hearse used for Harold Washington. It's a very unusual situation to see something like that. Let's move on. Elsewhere around the same pond is Calvin DeWolf, who was part of the abolitionist crew in Chicago. In 1860, he was involved in helping a woman named Eliza Grayson escape from her enslaver, she had escaped from Omaha. She was one of the fairly few enslaved people in Nebraska after the Kansas-Nebraska Act, but got a job as a domestic in a house of ill repute and was a little bit too vocal about what her situation was. People got back to her enslaver, Stephen Knuckles, who was able to come to Chicago to try to get her. Calvin DeWolf, whose facial hair is not quite so interesting as William Hale Thompson Sr.'s, but definitely worth a look in any case, was among the people who helped her escape. I feel like he wasn't that widely regarded as one of the big abolition people in town, but he was definitely part of some of it. And also, once again, that beard. Eliza Grayson managed to make her escape. We don't know much of what happened to her after that. Stephen Knuckles still has a park named after him out in Nebraska. But speaking of Underground Railroad stuff, somebody whose activities and reputation in that field are much better established is just on the other side of the pond. That is a family plot over here for one of my favorite people to talk about. As you all know, Charles Volney Dyer was a friend to the poor. All right, Charles Volney Dyer. Now, Charles Volney Dyer came to Chicago as a surgeon. He and Dr. Levi Boone teamed up to dissect John Stone, the first man executed in Chicago. But while Levi Boone became a member of the Know Nothing Party and another of our disreputable mayors, Charles Volney Dyer was known as the president of the Underground Railroad. Now, he gave up medicine to primarily deal in real estate, but also did an awful lot of Underground Railroad work, including the story that I will tell again and again, that one time he was helping somebody escape, but a couple of slave catchers came up from down south, captured the guy, and took him to the Mansion House Hotel. Charles Volney Dyer was just finishing his breakfast when one of his clerks came and told him what had happened. He grabbed his cane, made his way to the Mansion House, busted into the room where they had the poor guy tied up, and the slave catchers told him, "Sir, you are interfering." I'm going to do this in the total Foghorn Leghorn voice. He said, "Sir, you are interfering. Sir, I say, sir, you are interfering with our domestic institutions." To which Charles Volney Dyer replied, "Well, you are interfering with my breakfast." busted his cane over their heads, helped the guy make an escape. Groups in Chicago put their money together to buy him a new cane. And that cane is now held in the collection of the Chicago Historical Society. They've confirmed to me that they still have it, but they've never gotten it out of off-site storage. I suggested it for Mysteries at the Museum a few times. It's never quite come around. Now, this was reported very early on, especially the presentation of the new cane, which still exists. So I really hope the part about him saying, "You are interfering with my breakfast," is true. You couldn't write that and expect to get away with it. But I love it. We'll move on just a bit here. There's a little bit around the pond. Just a little bit up the pond here is Roland Burris, who was appointed in that golden opportunity by Rod Blagojevich to replace Obama's Senate seat, who pointedly marked that it was golden. Now, this was pointed out, there's an awful lot of stuff on his monument. There's a trailblazer, first African-American in Illinois to become Illinois Attorney General, Illinois State Comptroller, and on and on and on and on and on. It doesn't list the Senate on here yet, or to be appointed to the Senate yet. It has been noted, though, that Roland Burris is still with us. He's still alive and in pretty good shape as far as I know. I know people who know him, they all have fantastic things to say about him, and personally, I think it's great to put up your own mausoleum while you're still alive. If you want any kind of control as to what is on there, the only thing is to do it yourself. Like at Graceland, I don't think Henry Graves was really picturing something like eternal silence. For the money, he was expecting something much, much larger than that. Just pop across the pond, though. He gets a little bit overshadowed. Gets a little overshadowed because right across the way is Jesse Owens, the Olympic champion of 1936, who won gold medal after gold medal in track and fields in 1936 at the Olympics in Berlin, right in front of Adolf Hitler, who had planned to use those Olympics to showcase Aryan superiority. But then along came Jesse Owens.
After the fanfare of the Olympic opening comes the most amazing performance by America's black streak Jesse Owens in the 100 meters.
You gotta look how far ahead he is of everybody else.
As if they're walking, as he wins the final and equals the world's record time. This and his later victory in the long jump may well be the athletic performances of the century. And now the final struggle is on in the women's javelin throwing. And here's little Sadako Yamamoto of Japan, with a name that spells trouble for commentators and a throw that just falls short of the 40-meter line. But in the end, it's the German girls who leave the rest of the world behind. Louise Kruger.
Jesse Owens. Now, pointedly, Hitler did not shake his hand as he did with many other gold medal winners, though Owens himself later said, well, Roosevelt didn't invite me to the White House either. That's fair. Let's move down the road just a little bit here. We're going to skip a little bit down, and one that I only have really is still photos. I hadn't thought to get proper footage of this, so I thought I would just be doing it virtual. I was going to go back to virtual here until the other day, but this is the Hickling McClintock. It also has the name Alabama on there, and I don't really know very much why. But William Hickling, the story went that he married a noblewoman in Scotland, but because he was a commoner, he had to flee to Ottawa, Illinois. Better information suggests that he moved to the States and got rich outfitting people who were going out to California for the gold rush in the 1840s. Now, married to a woman named Sarah, who was 27 years later. Now, he had married his partner's daughter himself, and when she died, he married Sarah, much younger, and he died very soon after that wedding. The story spread around that Sarah, his new wife, had poisoned him, but nobody really investigated. Years later, Sarah married a guy named William McClintock in Iowa. He was much younger, and she was an old woman in a wheelchair and frail. But they married and moved to Chicago, where he enlisted Emma Nelson as a nurse. Now, when she died, there were rumors that he had poisoned her. She died in 1897, having just left everything to young William, who was accused of poisoning. He ended up marrying Emma the nurse, settled out of court with the relatives for the poisoning stuff. Now, when he died without a will, she got a third of it, and their child, Billy McClintock, got the rest. So Billy was primarily raised by guardians, Julie and William Shepard. Now, there's all these stories of poisoning already. The McClintock-Hickling millions were already thought to be cursed. Julie, in particular, was kind of manipulative. After after the old man died, these two just kind of moved in, claimed to be distant relatives, and were very much the couple who came to dinner and never left. They ended up largely raising him after Emma died. Julie, in particular, was known to be very into mind games. They had a preacher who followed them around who just doesn't seem to have had very much to do. But then, when Billy got engaged at the age of 21, he suddenly became sick with typhoid fever. Tried to have a priest in to marry him to his girlfriend already, but at the time the Shepherds had just talked him into writing a will naming them the heirs in case he never managed to get married. Then, strangely enough, he got typhoid fever. Bodies started to be disinterred. They started finding lots of mercury inside of these bodies. This is a long and complicated story that I could never get quite right. Bottom line is the Shepherds really seem to have given young Billy McClintock typhoid fever. They had raised him really just to slaughter him. This was never entirely proven in court, at least not beyond a reasonable doubt. Julie and William Shepherd ended up inheriting all of the cursed fortune, but they squandered it. They ended up dying in a nursing home up in Evanston. So, very long story there. But just nearby them, I found them because I just needed something to talk about in between Roland Burris and Nick's next grave, which is a little bit enough of a hike away that I wanted something new, some other story in there. But I certainly did not wish to leave out Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells was an anti-lynching activist. She wrote books about the horrors of lynching in the South that really tried to spread the story up around here before moving to Chicago, where among her various accomplishments, she worked for Harry Olson. He hired her as a probation officer, the first black woman to have that job in Illinois. Now, Harry Olson had been the lawyer who prosecuted Johann Hawk in court. Now, also, he was on the president of the National Board of Eugenics, which is the science of improving the human race by deciding who can reproduce and who can't. Now, generally, this is associated with racism, and there's definitely a lot of racism there. Olson himself was considered a civil rights hero by the Chicago Defender, the black newspaper here. And personally, he rejected all of the racism in it. He thought it was all about stopping the criminally insane from reproducing. But he's almost willfully ignorant about how the standards he was pushing for might have been applied had they actually become a thing. And I mentioned that he was the lawyer for Johann Hawk, whose last victim is buried here. Just move up over here a little bit. So there's an empty space, unmarked grave around here for Marie Walker. Now, Marie Walker was the last murder victim of the guy I have a book coming out on next year, Johann Hawk. Now, from what I can document, he married about in the range of 20 women. There are certainly more that I've not been able to find the paperwork on, but known to have married about 20 women, suspected of many more. 5 of his wives mysteriously died, including Marie, who he married in Chicago in late 1904, 6 weeks before her death of arsenic poisoning. While her body was still lying on the ground down the road from here, he proposed to her sister Amelia, and Amelia said yes. So when he ditched her and took all of her money the very next day, Marie was exhumed. We can actually see her being disinterred right here. And her organs were found to contain enough arsenic to kill several people. So many so that Johann Hawk made an interesting point that there's no way that any intelligent person would have put that much arsenic into a body and not expected to be caught. I think there's strong evidence that the police planted at least some of the arsenic there, but probably not all of it. This is something that doesn't really come up in the papers too much, but it comes up in the trial transcript, is there was an awful lot of arsenic in the stomach, probably more than a normal murderer would have used. But the arsenic that likely killed her was not administered through the stomach, it was administered through enemas. They didn't really talk about this too much in the newspapers back then. They had lots of ads for constipation products and laxatives, but actual descriptions such as that was a little bit further than they would go. The person who would have been in charge, well, this is the era when Coroner Hoffman and Inspector Shippey would get into all kinds of shenanigans. In fact, right next to this genius, literally it says genius, Hawktois, is G.M. Shippey himself, the chief inspector circa 1905. And stories about this guy are just legion. This guy was, frankly kind of weird. And there was a time when there had recently been a murder. He rented a horse that he thought had been rented by the murderer, I think it might lead him to the killer. That same case, he allegedly had the body propped up in the receiving vault at Mount Carmel Cemetery with a hand extended, so he could lead in each of the suspects to have the corpse point at them to see if it would scare anybody into confessing. It didn't work. That was in the Celafini case. Bakes the Dead, a detective. But a couple of years after the Hawk case, a young man named Lazarus Averbuck knocked on his door holding a sheet of paper. They didn't know what he wanted. All that Shippey knew was he looked like he was Jewish and therefore probably an anarchist, so he shot him to death. Now, Shippey was protected by Coroner Hoffman, who made sure that nobody could ask any questions at the inquest. They established that it was self-defense, but they also kind of knew that Shippey's mind was not what it had been, and he ended up spending most of the remainder of his life in an asylum. He was never served a day in uniform again after this. But while we're covering this, not to mention, well, here we have part of the Jewish section that we did cleanups at the first couple of Mystericons, but now a local synagogue has taken on management of it, so it is looking much different now. Just across from that is Elizabeth and William Holton. Now, Elizabeth and William Holton tend to come up in a lot of retellings of the H.H. Holmes case. They always say that Dr. Holton was an old lady who was running a pharmacy while her husband, the actual pharmacist, was dying of prostate cancer. She was only too happy to take on this young new go-getter H.H. Holmes to handle the register for them. But then they mysteriously disappeared, and Holmes told everybody that he now owned the pharmacy, and they had gone off to California. This is one of my favorite things that I researched when I was doing the Holmes stuff. Dr. Holton, turns out that Dr. Holton was not an old man, she was a young woman. Dr. Holton was not the wife of a doctor, she was a doctor. Her husband had some kind of job on the railway. She had been at the University of Michigan about a year before Holmes was there. They probably had mutual acquaintances. Now, he did buy the pharmacy from her. There were some kind of shenanigans. Neighbors all remembered that it was hell on earth trying to get the guy to pay. But I've not been able to find any sort of lawsuits, who must have all been handled fairly quietly. And as we can see looking here, they certainly were not killed before 1893. They both lived well into the 20th century. They didn't really talk much at the time of the Castle investigation, though, possibly because they were in mourning. You can see to the left their daughter, Abby, who would have been just a toddler when Holmes was working at that place, died herself in 1895. So they would have been in mourning at the time Holmes was being investigated. And Holmes himself, for his part, was in jail by 1895, so he's off the hook for that one anyway. Shenanigans. People talking in the comments about strange autographs. Now, they told me, I was at Bob Dylan's boyhood home a couple of years ago. They told me that they recently got a call there that apparently when Dylan played Plymouth in 1975, they gave him a beam of wood from the Mayflower that was signed by all of the Pilgrims. I'm sure that's real. But they're trying to get it back now, and I think that is hilarious that they're trying to get the Mayflower back from Bob Dylan. Said it was Columbus, and I just said good luck. Let us move on a bit. We gotta have some gangsters here, don't we? There's all kinds of fun stuff going on in the comments tonight, it looks like. I try not to read the comments too much. I can get distracted very easily. I had ADHD back when it just meant you were a bad kid. But here we have the first major gangster mausoleum. Now, there were other, like, gamblers and kingpins who have mausoleums, such as Mike McDonald down at Mount Olivet Cemetery. But here we have Big Jim, the first of the 1920s era mobsters. Here he is with his first wife. He was running Colosimo's Cafe, where they were having a party for mayors during the DNC. We'll make our own jokes there, I suppose. But here he is with his second wife, Dale. Now, Dale Winter had been a singer in his cafe. After he was shot to death in the cafe in 1920 by assailants unknown, rumor is that it was Frankie Yale. I can't imagine they would bring in such a kingpin from New York to do a low-level killing like this. But he might have evaded the Chicago police, and he seems to have liked that kind of thing anyway. When asked if she suspected anyone, Mrs. Winter merely said, "I suspect everyone." He had apparently been telling all the gangsters that he didn't want to have to go against the feds like he would be doing in Prohibition, so he didn't want to do bootleg liquor here in Chicago. That was standing in the way of an awful lot of people. Incidentally, the detective who was questioning her at the time was John W. Norton, who had been one of the lead investigators in the H.H. Holmes murder castle case. Now, kind of made a fool of himself there, as did everybody on that case. But by 1920, he was like the Columbo of the Chicago Police Department. Would quite literally like buddy up to people and say, there's just one more thing that I don't understand. He was with that force for years. We found him for Find a Grave Friday one time. Let's take a look inside here. Somebody apparently broke in. He was buried in a $12,000 bronze casket, and that's 1920 money. We can look right in here. And that's where it gets weird. You've got James Colosimo, 1871 to 1919. Dude died in 1920. There was never any doubt about that. James Colosimo was alive and well in 1919, dead as a doornail, or dead as a coffin nail, the most dead piece of ironmongery in the trade, in 1920. Now here's some shots of it we saw a couple of years ago during Mystericon. Looked inside, found that there were some bullets inside. Super. After he was slain in his cafe. Slip in there a little bit. I don't know what goes around tossing live rounds into things in a cemetery. He used to just drop in pieces of pottery. But speaking of gangsters, not too far away. We'll just hike across the way here a bit. Just up near him is Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik. Now, we tend to divide the gangs in Chicago in the 1920s into two categories, the Irish gangs on the north side and the Italian gangs on the south side. It's way more complicated than that. Both groups had members of various ethnicities. It was much more about who grew up in your same neighborhood than specific ethnicities. Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik was a Jewish gangster. He was Al Capone's bookkeeper. You hear a lot of people claiming their uncle was Al Capone's bookkeeper. This guy actually was. And managed to remain in the business. He outlived quite a number of gangsters. It was said that at his funeral there were more Italians than there had ever been in a synagogue before. But he died in 1956. He was just about 70 years old, which in gangster years is like 150. This was not a job where you had a very long life expectancy. But of course, if we are going to be covering Oakwood Cemetery, one thing I don't really do much on the walking tour, I'd rather just ignore this whole thing, is the Confederate Mound. This was a mass grave for people who had been buried as prisoners of war at Camp Douglas here in Chicago. In the street the dogs are barking. They're fine. It's such a ridiculous conspiracy theory that it's easy to make jokes, but we had somebody in the live stream the other morning spouting about that stuff and being entirely serious. Laura Oak Woods is at 67th Street here in Chicago. But in the back there is a large mass grave for the Confederate dead, but right in front of it is a cenotaph to the unknown heroic men, abolitionists of the South, who sought refuge and scant bread for their families among strangers at the North. It says down below here, to those patriots who, without pension, without honor, went to their graves, without recognition even by their country, this stone is raised and inscribed after 30 years waiting by one of themselves, an exiled abolitionist. Now, this was commissioned by a guy who was not buried too far away from it himself, who said that he had come up from Florida himself. He'd been about the only one in his neighborhood who didn't start flying a Confederate flag. Also claimed to have stopped an assassination attempt on Lincoln very early on. But that he knew what they were doing in the schools down there. They were saying that this was all, that the invasion of the North by Robert E. Lee was just a regular tourist visit, really. That the whole thing had all been justified. It had all just been some kind of lost cause, not about slavery. He knew that they were planning to do it again. Well, you all know what I think. I loved this shot when they took down the Lee statue from Richmond and made him look like Darth Maul there. You know what Robert E. Lee puts in his coffee? Half and half. Also, here's Robert E. Lee at the Capitol. That's actually been removed now, I believe. but Jefferson Davis is still there. And really kind of strangely not too far away. Within sight of the Confederate mound, in fact. Is John H. Johnson, who was the publisher of Ebony and Jet magazine. Now, most famously, when Emmett Till was brutally murdered, he published a photograph of the mutilated body in the casket, which brought home to people just what was going on down in the South. Would later describe that as his proudest moment. It was a controversial move, putting such a gruesome picture into a magazine. But it got the point across. It got people to take the issues and civil rights a little bit more seriously. Emmett Till himself is buried at Burr Oak Cemetery here in Chicago. Well, let's move on a little bit. Let's do something a little bit more lighthearted. Well, kinda. This is an engineer, Walter Kummel, who died during the World's Fair of 1893. He had come over for the fair to present at the fair. Died while he was here, so the other engineers got together and bought him a headstone. Very nice of them. He had helped save Hamburg from the cholera wave of 1892. He was all set to speak, but died in his hotel. Other engineers got together, pitched in, and gave him a nice funeral. It's like pitch in, like, let's give him the best darn funeral anybody ever had. Yes, Susan, I said Jet. Audrey, glad to have you in any case. There are also a number of interesting baseball-related graves right around here. For one thing, Cap Anson, who would later be recruited by none other than C. Montgomery Burns.
We'll give them token jobs at the plant and have them play on our softball team. Honus Wagner, Cap Anson, Mordecai Three-Finger Brown.
Sir?
What is it, Smithers?
I'm afraid all those players have retired and passed on. In fact, your right fielder has been dead for 130 years.
Damnation!
Cap Anson mostly played first base for the Cubs during a 26-year Major League career that went from 1871 to 1897. But here's the thing, this guy was racist as all hell. He refused to play against black ball players. Stories about Ty Cobb being racist tend to be said to be rather exaggerated. Not so with this guy. He started a bunch of businesses like a bowling alley and his own baseball team after his career, but blew all of his money, ended up doing vaudeville with his daughters, batting papier-mâché balls into the audience. You could make a lot more money in vaudeville than you could in baseball in those days. That's really where Babe Ruth made much of his money. But not too far away from him. It's almost like they're trying to balance the scales sometimes at this cemetery, isn't it? Not too far away from him, the more recent interment of Ted Double Duty Radcliffe. He was called Double Duty because he was both a pitcher and a catcher. The newspaperman Damon Runyon said he was worth the price of 2 admissions to see, partly because of the 2 admissions. He started with the Chicago American Giants, ended with the Homestead Grays in the Negro Leagues, but played exhibition games against Ty Cobb, who was at least less racist than Cap Anson that he would even play in those games. Roomed with Jackie Robinson when he played for the Kansas City Monarchs for a while. Managed the American Giants in 1950 and started hiring white players because all the black players were getting snatched up by the major leagues by then. Here he is on the Grays, the Homestead Grays. Josh Gibson is one of his teammates here. And there's Ted himself. Now, as late as 1999, when he was 96 years old, he became the oldest pro ball player ever by playing an actual inning for the Schaumburg Flyers. After the age of 100, he would throw 1 pitch a year for the Chicago White Sox. Behind him in the picture is Josh Gibson there. And now that the Negro Leagues have been incorporated into the majors, he has the highest single-season batting average. He had 441 in 1943. But let's move down just a bit more here. There is a statue of Abraham Lincoln. It is not one of the better statues of Lincoln here. But there is one. Among the sections of soldiers here. There's a great number of black Civil War soldiers at this place. There's some good information about them. One guy has gone through on Find a Grave and like cross-referenced all of their different records. There was one guy who was actually AWOL for a time because he had found out about the 13th Amendment, went to get his wife out of slavery, and was arrested and held in jail. To their credit, as soon as the Union Army figured out what had happened, they got him out of there. But not on the other side of the cemetery, well, not the other side, but a little further across the northern edge, is a monument to David Ayers, a Civil War Medal of Honor winner. Medal of Honor, it even says right there. Now, he was, Grant was organizing a party during the Battle of the Siege of Vicksburg, organized a party to build a bridge across a moat and set up ladders at a Confederate fort. This was such a dangerous mission that he would only accept single men to volunteer to work on it. About 150 signed up for the job, and about half of them were killed. The rest of them got medals. Incidentally, they did not come close to actually getting across the bridge. And let's cover one more here. A little over the time I usually go, but there's this wonderful statue that I just can't not look at. This is Kate Richardson, the wife of a carpet dealer Orlo Richardson, who died in 1890 at the age of 40 from Davenport, Iowa. Not much else can really be found. But there is this great mention when they first got married. The local paper in Davenport said, "Did just right. Like sensible people, determined on future happiness, our young friend O.W. Richardson and the accomplished Miss Kate Tiffany sought the service of the Reverend Mr. Lamb yesterday afternoon and were married." I like to imagine that he came up to them and said, it was like Parson Brown came up and said, "Are you married?" And they said, "No, man, but you can do the job when you're in town." Parson Brown never comes up to me like, "No, man, mind your own business," or something much more obscene than that. We congratulate them. May their wedding tour be delightful, and the long and rugged pathway of life be strewn with flowers of unfading love, garlands of happiness, and satisfactory packages of greenbacks. Well, I can't speak for the quality of their marriage or the length of their life, but the packages of greenbacks probably couldn't have been too far off given the quality of the statue that was built here. That is really a fantastic statue. It almost looks animated, more so than a lot of them. A lot of them just kind of look like they're reclining. She really looks like she's about to start stirring. Looks like she's really just relaxing in the bed there. Well, you know, I've got one other one plugged in here. Let's go check this guy out. This is Elijah Hoffman, who is an author of a number of hymns. Most famously, the one featured in what is quite possibly my favorite movie, Night of the Hunter. Leading on the everlasting arms.
Lean on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms. Shame on you, Ruby.
All right. So that is a virtual edition of the Oak Woods Tour. I need to go back there and film some things so I can include some stuff that was just on the walking tour. But we'll do that another time. We'll wait until the leaves start changing. There's a lot of pictures in cemeteries right now that I'm waiting to get until the leaves have started to change. But if you just can't get enough of me in cemeteries, this weekend, Sunday the 15th, we will be at Rose Hill Cemetery. Tickets are going fast. There's still a few of them left. But 2 weeks hence, 2 Saturdays hence, boat tour September 28th, 5:30 and 7:30. The October stuff is starting to roll out now too, but most importantly, Mystericon is coming up in 2 weeks and 1 day, a fortnight and a day. So everybody, thank you very much for joining me. We will put the Benny Goodman back on and just hang out as we always do. Thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling you all to stay safe and stay strong, and of course, if you can, do stay spooky, with the help of Mr. Benny Goodman. All right, thanks everybody. Patty is excited about Mystericon as well, Patty Vasquez. I went out to the radio station for the debate party on Tuesday. It was a good night. Thank you, Marita. Thanks to everybody who's hitting the donate button as well. No, Kristen, that's entirely normal. I'm pretty sure. Jan, in-person Find a Grave will be very, very close to last year's cemetery. It's not Mount Olivet, but it's one of the adjacent cemeteries. During the party was a blast. Good drinks, good friends, good fun, good debate. Hey, Deirdre, glad to have you anyway.
Loved those Bastards when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
Thanks everybody for joining me. Hey, Grace from Koi Metromania just messaged that she was watching and had a good time. Oh, she starts working at Forest Home next week. Interesting. I bet we can get some use out of that. Alright, I am glad to be done with today. It's been a long day. I had a private tour this morning, had a haircut, cooked a whole lot of corn. See, last weekend when Patty and I were in Wisconsin, we wound up on Sweet Corn Fest, or the Corn Festival, or the Corn Car, whatever they call it in Elkhorn. Not an Elkhorn, it was like Darien, I think? In any case, they had this mountain of corn, and you could fill an entire grocery bag full of ears of corn for $5. Then we saw there was a very long line. I asked the guy, what's this line for? He said, corn. I probably should have guessed that. You can stand in line for a free ear of corn. For a really long line, though. Was it Delavon? We went to Darien, Delavon, and a few different towns. We've been popping around towns doing door knocking. Yesterday we were kind of chasing around somebody from Elkhorn. The organizer at Elkhorn is just fantastic. Cindy, they appear to be roasting it in some kind of large machine.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in...
But it was the kind of corn deals I remember getting in Iowa when I was a kid. Like whole grocery bags for pennies on the dollar. Darien was quite rural. All the towns we went to were quite rural. Last weekend. Yeah, there was no line to fill a grocery bag full of corn for $5, but the line for one free ear of corn was very, very long. Make of this what you will, economists. Also, let me show you my new GIF that I made from whichever town that was. There was a sign there that said, "Keep liberals off the lawn." It wouldn't have occurred to me to get on the guy's lawn normally. But that sign is a dare. I was raised to respect the lawn. You don't go on other people's lawns. But that sign just orders you to. Elote on the cob. Yum. There should probably also be a gif of me just running like hell right after that. Obviously. And Miles was here earlier. I had to make sure he was here so nobody made any bad jokes. I mean, the jokes just write themselves, let's be real here. But once again, people have actually been... Somebody was in the live stream the other day saying, oh my god, make sure your pets are okay. And was serious. Out of a story that has been traced to a friend, of course. But let me see if I can find Miles, just to assure everybody. You ran away when I was trying to sing along with Zombie Jamboree earlier. I once had a cat who walked away when I was trying to sing Staying Alive to, like, the Wii American Idol game. Hold on. Miles!
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Alright, he is not in his usual hangs, but we're still working on this. I will find him. He's gone someplace. We'll find him in it. We'll try again in a second. Often this music kind of attracts him. No, Debbie, it is not serious. It is just racist propaganda.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Thank you, Gene. Now, Miles was here at the beginning, so he has fulfilled his contractual obligation. When he was already up here on the shelf when we began. I scared him away with my singing. I do that. Maybe he's gone to the windows. He likes the windows. Miles, in one of these windows?
We had to have someone new, a dance to
Sometimes he disappears on me. Oh, where you got him? Aha. Right where I was looking, but under the covers. Here we go.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Timothy, well put. It's just in line with, there's lots of urban legends to that effect. Very similar to the Jews grind your babies up to put their blood in matzo balls. Very similar to those urban legends. But here's this guy. Sorry we bugged you, Miles. Yep. Oh. You just shook some drool off all over me, huh? Sure, why not? He's like, I already showed up. I did it at 7 o'clock. 8 o'clock. I think we can all agree that Haitian immigrants deserve a better place to be than Ohio. That's my kid's take on it. He lives in Ohio part of the year. Well, Miles making I don't really have a time set up that I could bring Miles to Mystericon this year. People were less excited by him last year than the first year, so let it give him a year off. We gotta leave him wanting more, don't we, Miles? Like, you're gonna make me do that again? Now, J.D. Vance, I do believe, might eat cats himself, actually. I mean, the dude looks like he came from Melmac.
Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and here Helen Ward sings.
Carol Lilly is last seen sitting on a chair, but she's doing great. I actually had all three of them on the bed at one time, which is pretty unusual. Lily doesn't like to share space with others too much, unless there's food being given out. He's purring nice and loud right now, too. He's being nice and calm now, too. So often he wants to just, like, walk all over me when he wants petted. He never wants to stay in one place. Not as bad as Priya at that, though. Priya is presently on the bed, in Miles' usual spot. Her favorite place to sit is wherever Miles would normally be. I don't know if this is showing that she's the boss, or if she just idolizes Miles so much that she wants to do everything he does. think it's a little of both. Let me show you this guy. All sprawled out. Oh, his wrist showing how messy my floor is.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
Well, I don't know if she's challenging him. If she gets up someplace where he is, he'll usually go away. No new cats. We got some new people upstairs, but they did not bring cats. A couple little kids, but no cats. We apparently don't like cats. We asked, hey, do you guys like cats? They're like, no. They are from France. Well, he's just purring and purring here. What a boy. Yeah, new people are always advised to show up with some... to show up with at least some cat pictures. Miles. Okay, you gotta keep the claws away, though. Gotta put the claws away. Miles biting. Okay, well, I know what I'm doing tomorrow. In addition to, let me get a clip here real quick. In addition to putting final edits into... I got a gig. In a couple of weeks, there won't be a tour because I'll be at the Conrad Sulzer Library on a panel of horror authors. So I figured I should really get a product or something. So I am finalizing a book that I wrote but that never came out. It's a Banshee in a Rock Band book. And I've always loved this one. I almost feel bad giving it up because it's one of those things that might be more fun to keep working on than ever have out. But it is the 30th anniversary of this girl's band, so it's as good a year as any to put it out. That'll be out very, very soon. I've been trying to do a Banshee in a Rock Band story since about 94, in fact. Susan, I can call him Frank Lloyd Wrong in a group of people on a Frank Lloyd Wright tour, and they're usually okay with it.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
No, Timothy, they don't have cone heads. We come from France. Yeah. Octavio, if I get an email about that, yes, any walking tour that I run, Patreon tickets work for. Any walking tour that I am in charge of ticketing for and isn't like double length. But yeah, they work for Mystericon ones. I can't really do Patreon stuff for the boats because it's such a huge overhead. Walking tours, yes. The only one I've got listed so far is the Underground Railroad one. That ended up getting posted to a meetup group, so it's filling up.
Room of the Congress Hotel on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
But I let it go the first couple of weeks. It was exclusive Mystericon.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I don't think I've definitely missed some emails the last couple of weeks since things have been so crazy. But yes, that's always the rule, even Mystericon wise. that walking tour tickets, if I control the ticketing, like I don't control the ticketing to the zoo tour, so I can't give you a free one for that most of the time. But those Patreon $20 tier Patreon tickets are basically a season pass. I'm not that picky about how many tours people come to. Let's get some money back on here. Back up a little bit.
And they all loved it. They all
But just a couple more minutes here.
played by Benny Goodman.
Because really, once you start listening to the Nefertiti album, you just have to play it over and over and over again. All these numbers by Wayne Shorter. Joni Mitchell likened the opening to a silk screen where they just play the melody over and over again instead of just at the beginning and the end like your typical hard bop. But over and over again, but get a little bit out of sync as they go. Like silk screen. Oh, yes. James Earl, hang on. Let's all take a moment for James Earl Jones. There's a terrific King Lear with James Earl Jones from the early 70s. I believe it was Shakespeare in the Park that you can find online. All the love for James Earl Jones. 93. This is CNN. Debbie, there were many stories like that, not to mention like the 1910 stories that if you went to a Chinese restaurant, your daughter would be hypnotized with zither music, take up smoking, and marry a 70-year-old Chinese man. I also remember my high school teacher as late as the 90s telling me that they were kidnapping dogs to serve in Chinese restaurants. It was a pretty awful school. The end of that, Benny, almost sounds like a little bit of the Imperial March, in fact. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun. But all right, everybody, from me and James Earl. So all right, everybody, thank you very much for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I'll see you in the morning for Find a Grave Friday. And I will see you tomorrow. But until then, everybody, stay safe, stay strong, give each other adequate grace, and stay spooky, everybody. At least Darth Vader's not from Melmac.